Welcome to the IISS this afternoon. For purposes of the audio recording taking place, my name is Rahul Roy Chaudhary. I'm the Senior Fellow for South Asia at the Institute. India has a hectic electoral schedule the next few months. Several important provincial assembly elections are to take place in November, including the large provinces of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. This will be followed a few months later by the all-important general elections in India scheduled to be held by May next year. By then, the Congress-led United Progressive Alliance government will have been in power for a decade, with the leading opposition party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, along with its coalition partners, keen to replace it. Earlier this month, the BJP selected Mr. Narendra Modi, the powerful but controversial Chief Minister of the Western Province of Gujarat, as its prime ministerial candidate. Yet, little is known of the policy agenda of a future BJP-led coalition government in India if elected into office. This is especially the case with a new leadership taking control of the BJP, with few senior members of parliament and party officials having served in the earlier BJP government in New Delhi over a decade ago, led by the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. To discuss this and related issues, I am delighted today to welcome Mr. Piyush Goyal, representative of this new BJP leadership in India, to the IISS this afternoon. Mr. Goyal is a Member of Parliament in India and the National Treasurer of the BJP. He heads the BJP's Information Communication Campaign Committee that oversees the party's web, mobile and social media outreach. He is an active participant in the economic discourse in India and a columnist in leading Indian newspapers. He is also an investment banker with a strong legal background. Mr. Goyal will speak today on the policy agenda for a future BJP government in India. Piyush.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with me this afternoon. I was going through the list of invitees, and pretty veritable list of people I have, and I hope I shall be able to answer some of the questions you may have as we progress during the afternoon. I've been to the IISS earlier, and in my earlier interactions on the IISS platform, both in India and earlier in London, I've found that this is one institute which has very dispassionately conducted itself, looked at India, looked at the geopolitical situation in and around India. And towards that end, I'd like to compliment you, John, all your colleagues, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here. You know, India has, of course, had a nice 66-year history, some of it good, some of it bad. We have had our fair share of achievements. Nobody can deny India has progressed. There's been a certain traction over 66 years. But when we sit down and reflect on what we've achieved in 66 years, we are not very satisfied. We believe we could have done much more. We believe India could have gone on the path of progress rapidly, and we believe we've missed out on several opportunities particularly in the last 2 decades. Since we got onto the path of reform, we recognized we had to open up the economy. Of course, many people say India works best in a crisis, and probably that's what brought us to open our economy way back in 91. And therefore, I'll not go back in history to the 60s and 70s and the period where we were on a 4.5% growth over nearly 3 or 4 decades since independence till 1991. But I'll reflect more on the post-91 era and where we stand today. Because 91 we opened up, we had our first generation reforms, good amount of traction in terms of the world starting to accept India, potential of India, looking at India as a market, looking at India as an investment destination. We did make our first baby steps to get out of the license quota Raj, We allowed investors to come into different sectors. And I think the 91 to 96 period, that 5-year government of Mr. Narasimha Rao, was in a way a very, very important step in the progress of India in what we are going to see, what we have seen in the last 22 years and what we are going to see in the next 10 or 20 years. Of course, in 98, my party leader, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, became the Prime Minister in a coalition government which was called the National Democratic Alliance, NDA. And he had a couple of first 2 years of challenges. His first government in 98 lasted only 13 months, and he had to go and seek re-election because of certain problems in the coalition. So 98 to 2000, he had a period of 2 years where I think the government was struggling. We had the Pokhran nuclear tests, which did bring us into the nuclear age and into the nuclear club, but had its share of problems with sanctions internationally. We had the oil crisis around that time. We had the Far East Asian crisis. And I think the first couple of years, Mr. Vajpayee did take to get his bearings right. But post-2000, I think that government really took off. And from what we had inherited in 1998, which was a year which had seen 4% growth, 4.1% growth, 97, 98 was 4.1%. Interest rates were high at about 12%, 12.01% was the bank rate at that time. We had a situation where fiscal deficit was close to 5%. We had a high current account deficit when Mr. Vajpayee took over. Government finances were not very bad, but not in the best of shape. So we did have a situation where our foreign exchange reserves were down to $29 billion. And we had external debt of about $80 billion. So net, we were still about $50 billion minus. And when you juxtapose it to the size of the economy in 98, when Mr. Vajpayee took over, that was a pretty significant external debt at that point of time. I think what Mr. Vajpayee brought to India was a period of high fiscal consolidation. He focused his energies on bringing the fisc into shape, setting things right structurally, and also he focused largely on infrastructure development with construction, the highway program, the telecom revolution, the opening up of the power sector, first time around allowing international investors to come into insurance and banking. So really that's that phase from 2000 to 2004, where in my humble opinion, India saw the largest traction in terms of reform. Opening up of sectors to international investors, focus on infrastructure creation, a large focus on job creation, and setting the fisc right. So in 2004, when we went into elections, we actually thought we'd done a good job and talked to the people about what we had at that point of time called the feel-good factor. And we thought India was shining. And the statistics do seem to reflect that India was doing well. So the 4% growth, GDP growth had gone up to about 8.1% when Mr. Vajpayee left office. Actually, at that point of time, when the reference was the 99-2000 base year, it was 8.5%. But then we restated it at 2004-2005 prices to 8.1% GDP growth. Inflation was down to sub 4%. Interest rates had halved. So from a 12% bank rate, which effectively meant borrowers were paying nearly 20%, manufacturers were paying 20% when Mr. Vajpayee came in. In 2004, the bank rate had come down to 5.78%. That's literally half in 5 or 6 years. We had a situation where fiscal deficit was under control, about 4.3%. Current account, we had given a surplus for 3 years. So Vajpayee's last 3 years, we had a current account surplus, like never before. Since independence, we had never had 3 years of current account surplus, and since then, we've never had it again. So we left an economy with foreign exchange reserves of about $113 billion, 4 times what we had inherited, nearly for 289% growth. Our external debt was retained from 80, it had gone up to only about 111 billion. So net India was in a positive situation in 2004. Inflation down, interest rates down, current account positive. We thought we'd done a good job. We created nearly 60 million jobs in the 2000 to 2005 period. 60 million. Largely in infrastructure creation, real estate and housing, the construction industry. Where we probably didn't do well is in terms of managing our alliances, and probably the fruits of all that work were yet to reach the people, what we believed was the trickle-down effect. And maybe the slogans were a little ahead of their time. And as Dr. Arvind Paragriya recently mentioned when he was in Delhi, the UPA reaped what the NDA had sowed. UPA 1 reaped what NDA had sown. And UPA 2 is now reaping what UPA 1 had done. So in effect, really, we left behind a great economy for the UPA government to come in and enjoy the fruits of it for the first 5 years. So we had a period 2004 to 2008 where India continued to grow from 8%, it even went up to 9.5%. But there were two significant differences between what Vajpayee did and what the Manmohan Singh government did. One was Vajpayee focused on investment-led growth. The UPA 1 focused on consumption-led growth. So they let the fisc deteriorate. The BJP government had brought in a thing called the Fiscal and Budget Management Responsibility Act, FRBM. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, FRBM, which they did not follow beyond the first 2 years. They said, okay, we'll suspend the FRBM provisions. They allowed the fiscal deficit to deteriorate, allowed current account to go down, borrowed heavily, and in the garb of the fiscal stimulus to protect the Indian economy from sliding down, we saw a period which had 9% growth from 2004 to about 2009, but largely consumption-led. And I'll just give you one statistic to reflect why I say that. India in the earlier years, till about 25 years ago, had about 30% of its budget, its annual budget, being spent on infrastructure, capital expenditure of the government, till the 80s. When Vajpayee took over in 98, this figure had come down to 22%. So 1998, when Mr. Vajpayee became Prime Minister, the government of India was spending 22% of its budget on capital expenditure. When he left in 2004, he was able to maintain and inch it up a little bit to 23.5%. So we had 23.5% of our budget still being spent on capital goods, which is essential for a growing nation. Capital investment in infrastructure, in PSUs, which were investing further into manufacturing, variety of investments. Today, in 2012-13, that figure has come down to 11.7%. So we are now spending only 11.5% of the budget on capex. Now, that really, if you ask me, is the crux of the problem. Today, we are in a situation where our growth has come down to 4.4% in the last quarter. We have a current account deficit very close to 5% of GDP, which is unheard of. Never since independence has India had a situation of 4.8 or 4.9% current account deficit. The fiscal deficit was reined in last year to 4.9%, 4.96%. But again, that was done at the back of cutting down capital expenditure. So I often criticize that move of fiscal consolidation on the ground that what we did was we cut down planned expenditure by 150,000 crores, which is about current day $25 billion. We cut down planned expenditure. We added about 10 billion out of that into subsidies. So our subsidy burden grew by 10 billion. out of the 25 billion that we cut down. And the balance 15 billion largely comprised of 13 billion of capex, which the government did not do, including defense, which is your subject. So government cut down $2 billion, $2.5 billion in defense expenditure. Personally, I think that was a very short-sighted, myopic action on the part of the government, just to rein in fiscal deficit at the cost of the long term. But that's where India is today. Double-digit inflation not coming down, very high interest rates not coming down, the fiscal deficit, current account deficit, runaway growth, joblessness prevailing in the economy. In fact, UPA won the first 5 years of growth of 9% in the Manmohan Singh government, saw jobs growth of only 27 million. Oh, sorry, 2.7 million. I'm so sorry, my apologies. I was giving them credit 10x. From 60 million that 5 years of Vajpayee, we had job growth. It is 2.7 million in the first 5 years of UPA. And these are Planning Commission data, not my own. It's there in the Reserve Bank of India or Planning Commission website. 2.7 million jobs, and a country which adds 12 million to its working population. A young India, almost 55% under the age of 35, is yearning for jobs. They're aspiring for a better quality of life. And I think after 10 years, we find that we are at a situation where we need to set this right. And that's what the BJP promises, and that's what the BJP plans to do. If and when. I normally say if it comes to power, but then my party colleagues get very angry and they say, no, you better say when we come to power. And we are coming into power next year, hopefully. Let me get to, and just one aside, during all this period, Narendra Modi, who was heading Gujarat, had a period of sustained double-digit growth. So his CAGR of the state domestic product, state GDP, has been in double digits over last 10 years. His state has the lowest unemployment in the country, 1%. Again, data from the Government of India. He has been able to bring down malnutrition, poverty, infant mortality, all these social parameters far better than the national averages, much as some of the opponents like to try and claim that he's too focused on manufacturing and industry and social sector indices haven't done well. But I can demonstrate that on every social sector index, his improvement over what he inherited is far better than any other state, any other large state in the country. So he has generally given his state a focus on ease of doing business. He has attracted international investment from all over the world to his state. Manufacturing has grown in that state. Again, I think in double digit, unlike the rest of India, which is growing manufacturing at about 6%. Agriculture, which in India grows at about 3%. Gujarat has seen upward of 7% CAGR in agriculture over the last decade. So in almost every parameter, Gujarat has performed better than the rest of India, and that is obviously reflected in his getting re-elected a third time in 11 years. What is his philosophy? What does the party promise should it come to power? I think there are three guiding principles on which the future BJP-led government will focus on. The first is we believe in minimum government and maximum governance. We believe government has to get out of people's lives. Government has to focus on regulation. Government has to focus on ensuring that policies are implemented rightly, in ensuring that people have safety, security in their homes, in their workplaces. Government's job is to focus on foreign policy, on defense, on an enabling environment, or as a facilitator to help the human being flourish as an entrepreneur, as a student, as a businessman, as an employee, in whatever walk of life a person goes in. So we believe the government's focus should be on good governance and not on bureaucratic interference in every walk of life. Our second guiding principle is speed, skill and scale. What Modi did in Gujarat, and which we believe a lot of it can be replicated in the rest of India, is he thought things to scale. He's not looking at incremental growth. He's not looking at incremental actions. He's looking at actions to scale. For example, I believe India can easily look at 100,000 megawatt of solar energy. Probably just in that one state your friend comes from, Manu. There's a state called Rajasthan which goes to the polls. It has one parliamentary constituency called Barmer, 72,000 square kilometers. We could probably set up 100,000 megawatt of solar power, and that's desert land. No agriculture, no productive use of that land. Just in that one constituency. And imagine the impact it would have on the power problems and the peak load shortages that India goes through. So we believe that India has to think in terms of scale. India has to skill its 500 million people who will be in the workforce in the now and within the next 10 years. So we already have a huge pool of youth, maybe even educated but unemployable because of the quality of education not being up to mark. So we believe the country needs to focus on a massive skill development program and enable people to become employable. And third, we believe all of this has to be done fast. We don't have the luxury of time as a nation. We cannot allow the nation to go at the slow speed at which we are going. We almost have a large eastern belt where Maoism is now taken deep roots. Maoism is like the Naxalite movement, which is now gradually deteriorating more into a Maoist movement. So we have a large belt on the eastern corridor, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, parts of West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. That whole belt, which is about 1/3 or almost 30% of the country, where there's a deep influence of the Maoist elements. And that largely comes in because of lack of adequate development. So I think country does not have the luxury of time. We need to look at rapid development of these underdeveloped areas. And in that, we believe we'll have to focus on job creation and meeting the aspirations of people, not through entitlements, but through empowerment. That's another significant difference between the current dispensation and what my party brings to the table. Somewhat in a way what David Cameron said, where he talked about nothing will, you have to do something, nothing for free. You got to do something if you want to get something. I'm not being insensitive to the poor in that, but I believe we can convert a lot of our social security projects into job creating projects, into work creating projects, into infrastructure development projects, and still give people adequate social security without making it like a dole. So in some respects, we have a employment guarantee program called Manrega in India. Now that has created no infrastructure. We've spent $40 billion in the last 6 or 7 years with zero infrastructure being created out of that. Now I personally believe that same amount, if it was spent on actually creating infrastructure, if it was actually spent in being like a skill development program maybe, we could have paid people to come and learn a skill and then make them employable rather than just give them like a dole. Because personally I believe that doles only kill initiative. Doles land up making a person literally wanting to be poor so that he can get a dole. So we have seen in the last few years a thing what I call institutionalizing poverty. And I think what we need to now do is generate that aspiration in those poor for a better life coming out of their own work, their own effort. And these three, the minimum government, maximum governance, speed, skill and scale, and empowerment over entitlement, these three will be the guiding principles on which a future BJP government will run the nation. We have, of course, a few steps which we'll need to take very urgently if at all we have to achieve these wider goals. One of the first things we believe we need to do is get the confidence in the India story back. Of late, international and domestic investors have lost confidence in the India story. Couple of bad moves of the government in terms of the 2011 budget, withdrawing the tax ops for the SEZ units without grandfathering the past. So they actually, India as a nation worked on the SEZ story, which was again introduced by Mr. Vajpayee. For 8 or 9, 10 years, we attracted investors to come in and create infrastructure, create these enclaves for making India more export competitive. And then suddenly in 2011, the government introduced minimum alternate tax and dividend distribution tax on that. I think that was the first step which went down very poorly with investors, particularly foreign investors. And then you all have the famous retrospective amendment in tax laws, which more popularly is known as the Vodafone tax. I think that was the last nail in the coffin in terms of international investment appetite for India. I have vocally and publicly, both in and out of Parliament, opposed that law. I spoke on the finance bill in 2012 at length, where I argued against the government finally passing that retroactive amendment. Not that I have any great love for Vodafone, let me put it on record. It's nothing to do with Vodafone as a company. It's more to do with the credibility of the Indian government. I think the Indian government prides itself in continuity, and it prides itself in the fact that we respect the judicial decisions, we respect the rule of law in India. And in fact, unfortunately, the background was not very good. The Prime Minister was on record in a letter to the British Prime Minister assuring that the rule of law will prevail. And then the Indian government backtracked on that and brought in a retroactive amendment going back to 1960 when the Income Tax Act was passed. And I think we need to set these things right. The government needs to earn the confidence of investors, both international and domestic. We need to give them confidence that we will not in the future make any retrospective amendments. Governments can have policy changes. So I can decide that a particular policy prevailing in India, maybe by an earlier government, is not good for India. I can prospectively change that policy. But I will have to grandfather the past. I'll have to give an assurance to investors that their investment, their money, their time, effort spent in India is safe. And I think that will be one of the first tasks that my government will do in terms of giving back that confidence to the world. Another thing we'll have to focus on is fiscal consolidation. We have currently come to a situation where India is $390 billion in debt from the $110 billion that we had left behind. In 9 years, that $110 billion has become $390 billion, while reserves have gone up only from 113 to 278 billion. So reserves are up by about 150%, but debt is up by about 350%. So we have to seriously focus on fiscal consolidation. I think inflation is bothering large parts of India. We'll have to tackle the supply side to get inflation in order. And we'll have to look at job creation in a big way. And with that, the skill development. So I think skill development, job creation, a massive infrastructure build-out program, particularly in the construction and housing sectors. I, for one, am one who believes that housing can be that one big ticket idea that can revive the Indian economy. And I'm open to suggestions, I'm open to ideas from all of you in terms of how we can revive the housing sector, the construction industry. I look at tourism as being another big sector that India has neglected for far too long. We today have only 6.8 million foreign tourists coming to a land as large as India. And when you look at it from the perspective of a small country like Turkey having 33 million tourists, I won't talk of Dubai and Singapore. France has 83 million tourists last year. So we at 6.8, I think, can do a lot with our tourism. We need to set the infrastructure right in tourist areas. We need to provide safety and security for the tourists. But I personally am very confident that with the focus on those three principles, if we focus on infrastructure creation, we focus on the manufacturing sector, and as I said, we don't want government to interfere in the manufacturing sector. We believe that defense manufacturing should be opened up to foreign investors. I mean, it's beyond my comprehension. If something can be imported, it's 100% foreign product. We might as well allow investors to come to India and manufacture in India. At least it will be partly Indian. Particularly because the offset policy has been quite disastrous. I don't think it has worked, whether in FDI and multi-brand retail or in defense or any of the other procurement that India does. So I think my government will focus on fiscal consolidation around the three guiding principles, tackle the supply side for inflation, give an honest government, not riddled with a scam a month or a scam a week that we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years, and focus ourselves on manufacturing, tourism, infrastructure creation, housing, rural rejuvenation, and an urban, maybe things like creating new cities and an urban regeneration that India badly needs to meet the growing aspirations of a young India. Thank you very much. I hope I've been able to give some sort of a philosophy that the party works on. I'll be very happy to take any questions. I've not touched on foreign policy and defense, so if anybody has any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Piyush. I think there's a lot of food for thought in what you've said, and I'm sure there'll be questions from the floor on the domestic aspects of the policy agenda that you've laid out so well. But I have several questions, but let me just focus on one question, and that is on regional security, which is a key theme of the IISS South Asia program, and particularly on Pakistan. We've seen in the last in the last 24 hours the talks between the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in New York. They've met, which has been very positive. There could be key developments from that. But what is the BJP's perspective on these issues? Because as far as one is aware, when Mr. Modi made a comment a few months ago on Sir Creek, in that sense, he was very critical of what the government was trying to achieve on Sir Creek with Pakistan. There's been something which, to my mind, is quite strange, which is the the amazing sort of focus on not talking to Pakistan from people in the Indian strategic community who may have links with the BJP, and I think there hasn't really been support for talks with Pakistan by Mr. Narendra Modi or senior members of the BJP. Having said that, of course, when the BJP government was in power with Vajpayee ji, there were key steps that the BJP government made in relation to Pakistan. So on Pakistan itself, what is or what do you think could be the principles or the contours of India's Pakistan policy in terms of what we've seen and heard from the BJP's Prime Ministerial candidate, Mr. Narendra Modi?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, Mr. Vajpayee is the person who really initiated expanding the dialogue with Pakistan, much against many people criticizing him, because that's the time we had the Kargil war. Soon after the Kargil war, there was a little bit of a period of cold war in a manner of speaking. The engagement had weakened. Mr. Vajpayee made an overture, put a hand of friendship again, there was the problem that the Pakistani establishment, there was a behavioral problem when Musharraf came to Agra and stuff like that. Despite all of that, Mr. Vajpayee had one belief. He believed you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors. And if you look back, when Mr. Vajpayee was Prime Minister, and in that respect he was truly a statesman, he believed very sincerely in engaging with all our neighbors, and that was that one period in Indian history when almost all the neighbors were on very friendly terms with India. Whether it was Nepal, whether it was Bangladesh, despite a regime which was a little hostile to India, whether it was Sri Lanka. After that, the situation only has deteriorated over the years. We have had skirmishes on the border with China and with Pakistan. We are yet to resolve our issues with Bangladesh. We lost some good opportunities of engagement with Sri Lanka, particularly when we let go the port project, which has gone into the Chinese hands. I think what Mr. Modi said about 3 or 4 weeks ago in Delhi, about very close to Delhi, a place called Rewari, he was addressing ex-servicemen, where he touched upon the subject of Indo-Pak relations. And I think he gave a very good thought. He said it's time that both Pakistan and India focus on the larger issues of poverty alleviation rather than a war amongst each other. He said we really need to fight a war against poverty and terrorism rather than a war with each other. So he actually gave a proposition for a 10-year pact where Pakistan does not allow its soil to be used for terrorist activities, and that's not something that the BJP is saying or that Mr. Modi is saying. That's something which is now almost documented with more and more evidence coming out of a lot of fugitives of terrorism in Pakistan, within the Pakistan boundaries. Osama bin Laden was finally found over there. And I think he has given an olive leaf to Pakistan to have a no-war pact for 10 years, non-aggression, no terrorist activities, and both sides work in strengthening each other in economic terms and fighting the war on poverty. So I think in that he has reflected a high degree of statesmanship. And it's not an aggressive stand against Pakistan, much as a lot of people in India were very, very unhappy when beheaded soldiers were found at the borders. Indian soldiers were beheaded, mutilated bodies came back, and there was a lot of angst in India. There was demand that the government scale down relations with Pakistan. I mean, ultimately it's not, some Congress friends used to ask me, if Prime Minister doesn't talk to the Pakistan Prime Minister, then what? Should we go on war with Pakistan? And it's not a question of extreme positions in international relations and diplomacy. There are always different levels of engagement. And we had believed at that point of time that we should have sent a strong message to Pakistan that we will not tolerate this and that we should have scaled down our engagement. Because ultimately in international relations, the world respects you only if you have some degree of confidence and if you have some degree of self-respect. And I think that's what the BJP will bring to the table. We will talk to Pakistan as fair neighbors. We will talk to Pakistan with reciprocity in terms of helping each other if they are open to it. And if they still want to continue with a policy of shoot and scoot, then India will not be wanting in its response.
Thank you. The floor is open for questions and comments. But let me start with Chow, who I know is first.
Thank you. My name is Chow, Asian Pacific Affairs. If I'm allowed, Mr. Goyal, to follow Rahul very much in foreign and defense policy, your neighbor up north and northeast, the Middle Kingdom, China, long-time sensitivity for Pandit and Churn Lai, Hindi, Chindi, bye-bye. Now we got a few issues. What does BJP take when it comes to border issues and trade issues with the big boy up north?
What is BJP?
What is BJP policy?
We believe China has an important role to play in terms of the economies of the two nations. We import a lot of products from China. We are exporters to China. And as I said earlier, we are not choosing our neighbors. China is very much there. But at the same time, there have been certain skirmishes in the Arunachal sector. On some occasions, China has tried to claim territorial supremacy over Arunachal. In that respect, India will be absolutely uncompromising. I think we need to develop Arunachal Pradesh and the borders over there, the infrastructure around the borders very rapidly. And I don't think it's a question of any sort of antagonism towards China, but India will have to protect its borders. And I'm sure China will respect the fact that India has to take care of its unity and integrity and the supremacy of India in Arunachal Pradesh, which is an integral part of India. The people there are a part of India, the citizens of India. And any incursions from any country, any in the neighborhood, are certainly not going to be acceptable. So we'll have to have a dialogue. Mr. Modi, in fact, was in China a year and a half ago. He was extremely well received. Some of the members who went in his delegation from industry were kind of amazed at the red carpet that was rolled out for Mr. Modi. And I think, personally, I would think China also understands that a progressive India is good for China and for Chinese business and economy. And any sort of uncertainties in that region are not going to help either country. And with the current leadership of China being so business focused, I'm sure we can come to terms with a sense of fairness on both sides.
Well, as it happens, we have a representative of Indian industry here. Ritika, do you want to also identify yourself?
So, I'm Ritika from FICCI, as you know FICCI very well in India. There's a recent survey that showed that there's a majority of Indian youth which is very hopeful to stay back and sort of work within the Indian economy. So there's not much work to be done there because they already are hopeful to stay back and not go out abroad. But what is the one thing that you think will translate their hopes into reality when BJP comes to power?
I think three things will happen. One, we believe in ease of business. You heard about how Ratan Tata, when he was thrown out of West Bengal, when he wanted to set up the small car nano project, was invited by Mr. Modi on an SMS. On his mobile phone, he just sent him an SMS. Come to Gujarat. Mr. Tata received all approvals and his land happily, no forcible acquisition. The farmers all sat in a room and happily handed over the land to Mr. Tata to set up that plant. The farmers are conscious that should that happen, that Tata comes in there, there'll be 10 other automobile manufacturers and 500 ancillary units coming up, which is now happening in Sanand. And the overall prosperity will help everybody. Similarly, I believe if India was to get out, unshackle itself from an overzealous bureaucracy, an overzealous tax administration, which every day I get mails, today there are raids on this company, tomorrow the CBI is behind another company. I think what we need to do is assure the young man and woman of India that this is an honest government. It will run by processes and laid down policy. We will not exercise discretion and help one jump the queue against another. We will develop skills in the country so that more and more young people get job opportunities. And we will, instead of giving doles, we will give programs for people to become entrepreneurs, set up businesses, look inward, outward, help creating new homes for the poor, help in infrastructure creation. There's so much to be done, Ritika, in India, and you're aware of that. I mean, the railway system, we have tons and tons to do to set the railway system right. The highway program, it's languishing in the last 7-8 years from what it was in the NDA regime, where we were almost rolling out 11 kilometers of highway every day. We've come down to 2 kilometers a day now. There are no new ports being set up. The airport system, the two airports, Mumbai and Delhi, process was initiated when Vajpayee was in power. After that, no new airport has been given to the private sector. So I think if if they can believe in the sincerity and honesty of purpose of the government in power. And that starts from the top. It's the leader who has to set an example for the people down below. I think the youth have a lot to do in India and
If I
contribute.
may add to that, so this is the general, the bigger mass of youth that you're talking about for skills and everything. But the smaller niche, which is highly educated, which is the one which is looking towards going out of India and making the most of it, if I can make a suggestion, I think what they need desperately is a very, very good entrepreneurship atmosphere.
Very true.
For them to be able to open up mid-sized businesses on their own.
Absolutely.
So that they become part of the success story.
I agree with you fully, and we are very conscious of that. We want all this talent to come back to India, and particularly at a time when the West is already at a $40,000 plus per capita income and India is languishing at $1,500. I think we need all this talented youth to come in, help us recreate the India growth story, and we will make sure we come up on the ease of business ladder very quickly. That I can promise you.
I think the gentleman there, yes, if you could identify yourself, please.
Jonathan Ward from the University of Oxford. I wanted to ask you, recently there's been the election of conservative governments in Asia, so obviously Shinzo Abe in Japan and then Abbott in Australia. Also in Europe, we have conservatives here in the UK, and the Reformist is one. And I was wondering if you see that as relevant or helpful or meaningful to BJP at all making this difficult. And also, do you see BJP playing a sort of role in conservatism in politics?
Let me take another question at the same time. Yes, Vipul, please.
I just got a brief comment, not a question. There, IISS member Vipul Thakur. There have been continuing unjustified reference against Mr. Modi by some Western analysts and some media regarding Gujarat riots. The simple truth is, the Supreme Court of India has discharging of any allegations which were politically motivated by Congress and some Western Muslim interests. So I think it's fair that people should be objective. If the only criteria was allegations, then the Western countries could not possibly deal with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, or Pakistan, where there is continuing genocide of Christians, Hindus, Shiite Muslims. So
Well, that's
what
all
I
right.
ask.
So to answer your question, I think it's not a question about, and you're right, I never thought of it that way. There's a sudden upsurge of conservative governments winning. And Angela Merkel, again this time around, is a big victory. I don't know whether that is going to be the defining moment or defining factor in the Indian election this time around. More importantly, I think having seen the last few years of, let's say, a very highly corrupt government and very high inflation, and inflation which on statistics may look like 10 or 12% to you when you look at the numbers given out by the government. But in reality, it's much more. And I'll take a minute to explain why. See, inflation is an index. It's a basket of products and an index derived out of that. Now, for example, food products in most inflation indexes in baskets in India is between 16 and 25%. But the fact of life is 50% of India spends 90% of its income on food products, right? So if food inflation will be at about 20% and 40% in the last 12 months, then the man on the street, the poorest man, is actually being impacted 40%, not 10%, which the index falls to when juxtaposed with manufactured goods and chemicals and all of the other stuff, which are not growing because the world is down, there's a recession. So manufactured goods, chemicals, all the other items, there are 600 odd items in the basket, inflation basket, which are not really relevant to that poor man who's barely making 2 square meals in a day, if at all. So the Indian angst against this kind of high inflation and massive corruption today is going to be reflected in this poll. And secondly, if you look at the last 6 years of elections in India, including 2009, when Manmohan Singh was voted back to power, and about 10 or 12 states which have gone to polls or actually in a manner of speaking, every state in the last 6 years has gone to polls. If you see all the results, the Indian people have chosen not to have instability. They've chosen to veer towards one side and give if not an absolute majority, a very strong swing towards one side. So I remember 2009, Congress leaders and my party, we were both jostling that one of us is going to be 150, 160 seats. So whoever is 5 or 7 seats higher than the other forms the government. And Congress got 206, we were left with 116. The people could not see in us a viable alternative. There had been a lot of dole programs like the loan waiver and the work program, Manrega and all. And they won by quite a decisive margin, 206 against 116. Look at Uttar Pradesh, look at Tamil Nadu, look at Bihar. Every state election in the last 6 years has given a massive majority to one party. Therefore, I'm inclined to believe this election, you will see it's not an arithmetic game. What you often hear pollsters trying to say, BJP and NDA will go up, but it will stop at 180 or 200. Will Modi be able to cobble up new allies and stuff like that? Personally, if you ask me, you will see a decisive majority in this election. I mean, Modi going to a state like Tamil Nadu, just 3 days back, Trichy, and go to the net, open narendramodi.in, and you see the pictures of that. In the history of India, the Janasangh or the Bharatiya Janata Party, our erstwhile name was Janasangh, we have never been able to get 1/10 that crowd in Tamil Nadu. What came to hear Modi in a far off place like Trichy in South India, where BJP has no presence. The crowds that came to Delhi yesterday, in a state which Congress has ruled for 15 years, were unparalleled. You go to YouTube, you'll see the crowd, it's shocking. Jaipur, which is run by the Congress for the last 5 years, Ashok Gehlot is the chief minister. Modi addressed a program there a month and a half ago. 45 minutes the gentleman kept pleading with the audience to keep quiet so he could speak. But the chanting and the hysteria, Modi, Modi, Modi for PM, just wouldn't stop. So there is a anger, the angst that she said, particularly amongst the youth. They want a better life, they want jobs, they want a home to live in, they want quality education, they want their parents to be taken care of in old age. That type of hope and aspiration is what Modi reflects today. So I see a very big swing and a majority coming his way.
Okay, let me take 3 sort of quick questions, and then we'll end, because I have one more question of my own. But please, if you could, then yourself and then Kiran, please.
Umar Hamid from the Institute. Just leading on to the question you just answered.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that perhaps, over the last 20 years, although you feel that there is going to be a change, but there have been essentially coalition governments. How do you see the challenges of coalition building, and how much credence do you give to a third front, or the talk of a third front government?
Let's take 3 and then we can.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Trishar. I work in the social media hub at BBC News. I'm particularly interested in your role looking at social media, digital campaigning. Just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think of the digital election campaign that's about to come and the BJP strategy around it.
Okay.
Just a comment. I'm from the Institute here. Since you talk about the kind of charismatic kind of nature of Mr. Modi, and he's been able to really gather a lot of crowds, I mean, and especially the youth and the angst and the anger that you talk about the youth. I mean, we saw that in Pakistan with Mr. Imran Khan. So does the BJP ever wonder that if that's going to actually translate into like kind of electoral wins or not?
Right. Any other?
And that's I'll do the last one.
Okay. The first one about the third front. In fact, I'm very happy as long as the pollsters keep reflecting a third front surging ahead, because the people are extremely scared of the third front. You saw that, as I said, in the last 6 years. Every election, wherever they found they want to remove government A and wanted a new government, they went for whoever was the best alternative. Tamil Nadu, the DMK was thrown out, did not even get enough seats to become leader of opposition. In Uttar Pradesh, Even Akhilesh did not know he will get 234 MLAs. But when they wanted to throw out a corrupt Mayawati regime, they gave him 234 out of 400. Bihar, when Nitish did a good job, the Nitish BJP combined government, they gave us 90% hit rate. We fought 101 seats. We got 91 MLAs elected. Nitish got 80% of his MLAs elected. Gujarat, good government, people were happy. So both pro-incumbency and anti-incumbency, both ways, people have voted this time for decisive governments. There has been no confusion in their mind. The regional parties certainly reflect a lot of the aspirations and the local regional aspirations. But when it comes to the national mood, I think people nowadays in India have become quite aware. And in that, the social media and the spread of television, I'm adding television because social media still has a 15% penetration in population, which in the voting population would be about 25%. But in terms of television, we have now 65 to 70% of India connected through television. We have almost 75% of India connected on mobile phones. And mobiles today, you can send videos. Feature phones since 2008, all phones in India have been feature phones, either imported or manufactured. So you have a chance to reach out to people, the length and breadth of India, which you never had before. In the last 5 years, mobile penetration has almost quadrupled. Television has gone up 7 times. Internet has gone up some 13 times. So you have a huge knowledge and information flow reaching out to people. And they understand that they want a strong government, which is why I feel personally that they may vote differently in the national election and differently in the state election. And a number of polls have reflected that. The people are talking of a different party at the center, and sometimes if I have a weak presence in that state, a different party in the state. So you may find a lot of that happening in this election. As regards the social media, Modi is far ahead of the rest. In fact, he started getting onto the technology platforms about 6 or 7 years ago. You know, in the last election, he brought in the 3D technology, where while giving a speech in his room, he was able to reach out to 55 spots at a time with a 3D image of Modi. And I've attended one of those. It was fascinating. In terms of Facebook, Twitter, in terms of generally the YouTube channels, the availability of Modi has expanded pretty deep and far within the social media space. I'm now taking that to the next level with a lot of initiatives on mobile TV. In terms of engagement, I just did a Twitter chat yesterday where I was inundated with questions. I do that once every 15 days. Again, a first for a politician who's responding straight on to any questions that people have, and very inconvenient questions at that many times. So we are completely conscious that this 89 million Facebook users, which by the time elections come in April, May, the CEO of Facebook tells me will go up to about 130 million in India. Twitter has a lesser presence, but internet per se is now gone to about 150 million. We have a large mobile TV viewership picking up now. And of course, SMS and WhatsApp and things like that are spread far and deep. So I think this will be a game changer in this election, particularly amongst the youth, where information flow to them will help them to be more attracted. Similarly, as you asked that question, the difference between Imran Khan and what you see today is two. Imran was a one-man show. There was no party behind him. He has not been able to build up any organization. The BJP, and along with us, our larger thought and ideological family, is entrenched in every nook and corner of India. Today I have close to probably 13 or 14 million members of my party. Imran Khan had nothing of the sort. Today I have units, functioning units, in over 5,000 towns. I have a worker in every booth. Booth is the place where the person goes to vote, which has about 1,000 or 1,200 voters. There are 700,000 booths in India. The BJP has a presence in over 500,000 of them. Now that kind of a reach was not available for Imran Khan, howsoever much his charisma may be there. So then people realize that a one man cannot run the show. Even Modi as a whole team, we are thousands and thousands of activists apart from the members who are working day and night to make that happen. So it's not a fly-by-night effort, it's a deep engagement with the people.
Let me ask, Piyush, let me come back to the first question I asked, and I think from the discussion and the responses you've given, and that is the BJP leadership. I mean, my sense from what you're saying is, really, we saw a Vajpayee government for several years, over 10 years ago. We are now looking at the possibility of BJP government in coalition in India. But the leaders have actually changed. I mean, the people in the earlier BJP government, Vajpayee ji, Jaswant Singh ji, others, Advani ji, are not going to be represented in any way. So in terms of, say, Vajpayee ji is thinking about, well, we can choose our friends but not our neighbors. And I know you elaborated on some of Narendra Modi's thinking. But I mean, what are the sort of the leaders we are going to see, the new leaders emerging, including yourself, of course, in the new BJP, as I see it? Because I have a very sort of little sense of this new leadership, and I think it's important to try to understand this new leadership.
But I think
the
that's
BJP.
a process of evolution every country goes through. Whether it's the US, whether it's your own country, where you have two brothers in a party fighting for supremacy at an age of 43 and 45 or something. Now, probably when they fought, they were younger. And when you see the American president who takes charge at 41, 42. In fact, we in India are still pretty far behind. We still need to have the youngsters come in more actively. I always appeal to a lot of my young friends that don't look at politics with disdain. Come into politics and be a part of the change you want to be. I think the BJP is also going through that evolution process. We certainly have very senior leaders whom we respect deeply. We look up to them as father figures. Mr. Advani has been our leader for so many years, and he does keep guiding us. He is a source of inspiration in terms of a good, honest leader. 60 years of unblemished leadership of the party. And Jaswant Singh, whom you have worked with closely in the past. We have a lot of such senior leaders, Murli Manohar Joshi, Yashwant Sinha. All of them will have a role to play in terms of guiding and mentoring the next generation. But then the advantage with the BJP is we are not a dynastic party. It is not that the surname matters. It is not that because I'm born into a particular family, I become a leader naturally. For us, it's a long haul. Our leaders emerge from the grassroots. So you have a Mr. Modi who was a tea stall server. He used to serve tea in a village dhaba, a village shop on the highway near his village. Where he served tea. And the other day we were talking to somebody and I was with Mr. Modi and he was remembering days when he used to go the route of the Indian Railways. So he used to get onto a station, serve tea in the compartment, get out at the next station and take another train back. Serving tea in the rail compartments, worked his way up the ladder. He has empathy with the poor. He knows what poverty is like. He has himself been jobless. He could not get the benefit of higher education. He's not even probably past high school. But even today, a person is a good listener, forever wanting to learn. Every conversation is looking at what he can take away from that conversation. He asks pertinent questions. If any of you have had a chance to interact with him, his questions are always very pertinent, and how he can use that to benefit his state or now his country. So I think we have a plethora of leaders. In fact, the complaint other people have is we have too many leaders. So in a democratic setup, I think we have enough and more talent. We have Mr. Jetli, Sushma Swaraj. We have the next generation of leaders. We have state chief ministers who performed honorably. Shivraj Singh Chauhan, Manohar Parrikar, Raman Singh. We've had some outstanding leaders both in the states and the center. And I can assure you we'll work hard to redeem the pledge that we are making to the people of India.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much, Piyush. That was, I think, an excellent presentation and the discussion, and a very sort of a powerful voice from the new leadership of the BJP. So thank you very much for coming and being here, and I'd like all of you to join me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good.